Hi friends, welcome to this next episode about the 12 Principles of Permaculture. We are moving right along and talking about number 8. This principle is to integrate rather than segregate. Examples of this on our farm go far beyond the confines of the garden. A lot of people think that permaculture is basically just a fancy word for companion planting. It's so much more than that though. It's an entire way of existence when it comes to not only your personal lifestyle, but the way the farm functions and operates. So yes, while I do incorporate companion planting, I am a very firm believer that animals and plants should coexist in the same spaces. And I know there may be some eyebrows being raised. Let me explain. Okay, so let's think about maybe a conventional farm for a second that would grow corn. Fields and fields of corn. And they're bringing in compost in order to help fertilize that crop. But then maybe down the road on the same highway, you might find a cattle farm. Whether it's beef steers or dairy cows, they're going to be producing a lot of manure. And there's a lot of farms that offload that on to other farms where that manure can be used as fertilizer, compost. Doesn't that seem like a lot of work? Doesn't it seem like there should be a way to connect the two? And I'm not saying you turn out a herd full of cattle and just let them openly graze on the corn crop. What I'm saying is it's about pasture rotation coexisting with crop rotation. On year one, maybe the corn is grown on the field to the left and the cattle graze in a divided pasture on the right side of the field. Maybe the next season that is swapped. So where the corn was before, now the cattle go and they graze on all of the broken stalks from the corn and they leave their droppings behind and they fertilize. Now on the other side where the cattle were before, there's a bunch of manure there. Could the corn go there? It reduces a lot of work of moving the compost, moving the manure from point A to point B. Another example, pasture rotation with animals only. So here at the farm, we use forageable cover crops. So I'm not growing edible crops in my pasture spaces. Instead, what I'm doing is forageable cover crops. I'm using right now crops that help to enhance my soil. And that's things like winter rye, triticale. I've got posts on that on Instagram if you're interested. But the first thing I allowed to happen is the horses go through. And they graze on that cover crop. And they're in there for several days. And then my sheep go through. Thereafter, the sheep leave, the flock goes through. And after the flock goes through, the pasture rests. And all of these different animals are contributing a different nutrient panel to the soil through their droppings, right? The other thing they're doing is they're keeping each other healthy because they're breaking many parasitic cycles that affect the individual species. So the parasites that are going to seek out a horse are not necessarily going to seek out a sheep. And when the horse is grazing, it's ingesting those parasitic eggs or even fresh larvae that is hatched that's going to make the sheep sick. And the sheep are going to do the same for the horses. It breaks the cycle. And then when the flock comes through, the ducks, geese, the guineas, they're blowing all that manure apart as they root around in it with their bills and look for insects. So now I no longer have to spread the manure. It's a working system all on its own, and it's very hands-off. All I had to do, besides moving the animals through the pasture spaces, was to make sure that they're properly rotated and plant forageable cover crop in the first place. Now eventually, ideally, what would be amazing is if I had a season or two of all of those animals coming through, I could grow crops in there and I could move the animals to the other space where the crops had previously lived. And now we're really adding all sorts of organic matter and nutrients to the soil. If we can go back to companion planting in itself for a second in the garden, I use a lot of companion plants, and I touched on guilds yesterday for my orchard trees to help benefit the main crop. So for example, if I were growing broccoli, cauliflower, other brassicas, I would interplant garlic because it helps to repel cabbage moths. Marigolds is a very common companion plant found in many gardens across the country because a lot of pests don't like the scent. So there's always ways to repel unwanted insects using plants. The other thing is we coexist with wildlife. We're not interested in segregating domestic space from wildlife spaces. We coexist. That's why we have livestock guardian dogs. For me, I'm interested in living as closely in alignment with nature as I possibly can. I need a space to be able to grow crops, but I'm not interested in killing fox, killing possum, trapping. My dogs help me to communicate the line because I want birds to come into the property. I want squirrels. I want wildlife here. It just creates a greater ecosystem. And I think that's what this permaculture principle all comes back to, is it's just a balance. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. Okay, so that's my take. I'd love to hear yours. We certainly don't have to have the same opinion, and that is okay. Feel free to leave yours in the comments below. And thank you so much for tuning in today.